Well, it's nice to see everyone. Imagine it's Q2 2027. You're a director on a board that's not just surviving, but thriving. Your company is outperforming peers for the last several quarters. You're bouncing back from disruptions like a pro, and you're seizing opportunities faster than the competition. Flashback to late 2026, your company's won a handful of industry awards. You're being recognized as a top employer, a most trusted brand, and a customer loyalty leader. Now picture yourself at the 2027 Inc. Magazine Governance Conference. Breaking news, your board is about to be crowned most valuable for its game-changing practices. Your CEO makes the comment that our board of directors has been invaluable. They challenge us, they support us, and they are part of our formula for success. Sounds like a dream board, doesn't it? Let's see. This is when my remote is deciding not to work. Just bear with me for a minute. There we go. So during today's session, we're going to use Slido, which is a polling application. So if you take your phone and take a picture, hone in on the QR code, that'll open an app on your phone, and you'll be able to see the questions and be able to vote and enter your answers as they come up. If you don't have a phone, then you can go to slido.com and enter 2953260. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to do that.
And that link is in the chat for anybody who wants to use that.
So let me pop up the first question. So now that I put out that vision in 2027, can you envision this happening for the company and board you serve on? Your choices are certainly we're like this now, probably with a little bit of effort, possibly with a major effort, or it's unimaginable. So if you would start voting, and we will start to see the results. We're going to give people about 30 seconds on the clock. So make sure you're casting your vote. You all have a big role to play in today's session. So let's start to see what the votes look like. Oh, wow. Possibly with a major effort is certainly far ahead. Let's see if there are any more final votes. We'll give you about another 10 seconds.
Sounds like we're going to have a good discussion tonight, Jay.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's interesting. We have the bottom two. We have an equal amount who say, I can't imagine this. And certainly we are like this now. So we do have a couple there. 53% of you are saying it's possible with a major effort. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because becoming future ready, becoming a board that adds value is what we're going to talk about, and is what's going to help your company, what's going to sustain success and increase value. So now we know a little bit about each other. You're not the only one that's faced with this challenge or recognize that there's work that needs to be done. Now, this might be in your boardroom if you're having trouble seeing and adapting to change. If you're losing stakeholder trust, customers are kind of unsure, partners, employees. And there was a recent, I think it was in Fortune magazine, where it was something like close to 50% of CEOs said, if we don't change what we're doing, we might not be here in the next 5 to 10 years. So there's that risk of organizational failure. So today we're going to discuss how do you disarm and safely remove this ticking time bomb from your organization. So let me share just a little bit about me. As Nick introduced me, he said I was chief catalyst and navigator. Now, as a catalyst, I steer the pot in an organization and I ignite them to action. How do I do it? I guide and enable them to bring their truth, their reality, and why future readiness is important for them to the fore. And then we use it to galvanize and mobilize their boards and leadership teams to start making changes, decisions, and commit to act. As a navigator, I stand and walk alongside my clients, guiding and enabling their board and senior leadership team to define the what and the how to become future ready, and guiding and enabling them to make it happen without running aground or into obstacles. For the last 7 years, my passion and my mission has been, how do I help my clients thrive, fulfill their potential, no matter what the future puts in front of them? So we're going to be answering these questions. Why is future readiness important? What must we do to become future ready? And how do we do it? During the webinar, I will share some secrets and a potent secret weapon. Notice I'm saying we, not me. Your engagement and input is going to strengthen the relevance of this session and help you retain information. So let's dive in. So why isn't it urgent to become future ready? Change is happening faster than ever. It's not just one crisis, it's multiple crises that are interconnected, whether it's coming from the external environment, when it's coming from your industry, a new business model, AI, cybersecurity. It's like we're getting hit from all sides. And it's going to be more, not less of the same. Think about the top 1 or 2 reasons in your organization why it's urgent to become future ready. And jot that down because you're going to come back to that. Now, looking at the picture, going from left to right, think about what are your out of control wildfires in your organization that need to be brought under control. What are the potential wildfires that if you act, you can still prevent? And you might be in a seemingly safe place, but as we've learned, that can be very misleading, and you don't want to be complacent. Consider Kodak, Blockbuster, Silicon Valley Bank, and Boeing. We see how they each seem to suddenly face a wildfire. But the reality is these were not sudden at all. Leadership in the board in many of these instances were asleep at the wheel. Had they not been, they would have seen things sooner and acted faster. For many of these, they were unforced and avoidable errors. So how have we responded to this? For the last at least 5 years, it's been one crisis after another. We've been in firefighting mode. Everything's a fire. Everything is urgent, and approaching it that way. But what we're seeing is that sustained firefighting is not healthy. People are getting burned out. They're disengaging. They're leaving companies. Mental health and the stress are becoming bigger and bigger issues. So not only is it not healthy, it's not sustainable. So when we think about future readiness, I want to give you a sense of what that feels like, what that looks like. Now, the companies and the competitors of Blockbuster, of Kodak, Silicon Valley Bank, they were paying attention. They had different outcomes. They were better able to withstand disruptions. And when they do that, they dampen their downside risk. They recover faster. And because they recover faster, they pounce on opportunities sooner and can get excess and amplify their upside returns. Being future ready increases your probability of success and value for stakeholders. And if you stay future ready, these benefits are sustainable. So who's responsible for being future ready? You are. It's your job as a board member. It's your job as a senior leader to become and stay future ready. And when that happens, companies can do amazing things. Customers' needs are anticipated and met. Employees like to come to work. They're enabled, they're engaged, they have a greater purpose, and they feel valued by the organization. Partners in your ecosystem want to work with you. Your surrounding community, society at large, because you're following ethical business practices, it's healthier. So that's helping society. Now, if you're doing those things, shareholders are richly rewarded. Now, if you take any of these out of the equation, if you go back to say, we really need to focus on the shareholders, and you hurt one of these other stakeholders, you might get better results in the short term, but they won't be sustainable, and that'll come back to bite you. So we've talked about the why. Now let's talk about the challenge we face. We each are being asked to drive constant performance improvement and increased value for stakeholders in good, in bad, in challenging times. When we don't figure this out, we're doing one of three things. We're leaving value or money on the table because we're not realizing our potential. We could be diminishing the value of our organizations, and ultimately, we could be destroying our organization. So let's take a look at another poll. So as we talk about this, and you think about your leadership team's ability to meet this challenge, once they're made more aware and they start addressing these issues. So put your votes in. It's kind of clear why being future fit is a critical topic. And I'll tell you that by the end of this session, I promise your confidence level will be higher because you know some of the things that you need to do. So let's vote. So we're seeing people, there's a little bit of a confidence that's there. We're not saying, this is hopeless. Now, Einstein defines insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting something different to happen. A lot of you have seen the movie Groundhog Day. If we don't change what we're doing, we're not going to get different results. So you have to do things differently. You have to change and you have to change what you do. So we're now going to move to the next segment, which is starting to look at the what. What needs to happen, and what do we need to do to become future ready? Demands on boards and senior leaders and expectations are expanding in light of the broader array of risks and responsibilities. Stakeholders are no longer satisfied just hanging on. There's demand for growth, and they want their investments, their companies to thrive. Boards and leadership teams must transform expeditiously. This isn't about making incremental change over a very long time. The time is now. Now, if you look at this slide, we have a variety of domains. On the left side, it's where we're coming from. We might not be there now. Some of us have moved past that. And I would say where we need to go to is the future state. So if we think about crisis response, do we react in the moment? Are we unprepared? Or do we respond intentionally because we are prepared? Are we focused on shareholders, or are we looking at shareholders and stakeholders, recognizing that you need to serve all of your stakeholders? I know many of you have spoken or heard the phrase noses in, fingers out. Boards of the past were deferential, very often passive. What I like to say now is not enough just to sniff around. You got to put your head in the game. And what that means is asking more questions, getting better information, knowing when you need kind of manage your altitude, when you need to get lower and see more of what's going on and ask questions, when you can pull back for the big picture. And the group dynamic in the boardroom needs to change. Very often that dynamic was a little bit of hierarchy. It was rigid, very often like the companies that they were overseeing. Very often they were conflict avoidant, especially in a private company or a family company. A lot of times they don't want to bring these issues up. And there's mixed level of engagement between different board members. This becomes the change agenda and the transformation in terms of moving from the yellow to the green. In terms of meeting preparation, that needs to change. Instead of what information are we getting? Is it only filtered by management? Do we seek out other sources? Do you show up at the meeting not being prepared, not having run through the materials that have been sent to you in advance? Are those materials relevant to being prepared and ready, getting information from different sources? Board members have to do their homework. They can't just rely on what's given to them. As you think about board composition, very often it's been friends and family, people they know, retired CEOs and CFOs. That's not enough. We need people who are qualified around cybersecurity, risk management, geopolitical risk. We need people with varied backgrounds. They can't all be finance people. So you want people with different experiences and expertise. Looking and thinking the same is not very helpful when you're in a turbulent environment. You want people to look and think differently. So here's a question for you. Where are you on this change continuum? Are you very yellow? Or are you very green? And where do you fall on that spectrum? So I'll give you about 30 seconds to answer. Let's make sure everybody is voting. Ten more seconds. All right, so what we're saying is we're kind of in that yellow-green zone. Now, the good news is we're not all the way in the yellow. We've started to make some of these changes, but as you've said, that's not been enough. So we know this is urgent, and we know the magnitude of change is significant. Now the question is, how do we get from point A to point B? Point A being the yellow, B being the green. So what's clear is that existing capabilities are not sufficient, let alone adequate. I love this quote. I think it's very fitting. It's over 50 years old from Alvin Toffler from the book Future Shock. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. It goes back to what we said. If you want different results, change what you do. For most of us, we found out that some legacy existing capabilities are not sufficient. Things that worked before don't work now. So start to think about what are the things you need to learn? What are the things you need to let go of and unlearn because it doesn't work anymore? The fact that, that's the way we've done it here doesn't mean that's the way you should do it. And what lessons do we need a refresher on in terms of updating our skills? That ability to unlearn is the toughest thing for many of us to do, but it's the most important thing to get unstuck. So I want to talk about, just quickly, 4 pillars of board effectiveness, because these are the things we're trying to achieve. It's critical that we have the right people, the right capabilities, the right diversity of thinking. It's important that we get the right information, not just what somebody thinks we should see, but that we get information on the issues and challenges we're facing. Internal information, external information. It means talking to senior leaders, not having everything being filtered. There's information. If we're looking at cybersecurity and AI, we might need more information from the CIO. If we're talking about culture and talent, maybe it's the CHRO. It's also about how the board is structured. What are the key processes we're working on? Who's on the committee? And about having the right group dynamics. The NACD, in its 2023 Blue Ribbon Report, which was titled Culture as the Foundation, Building a High-Performance Board. This report highlighted these very issues. And these are the same pillars, not just for boards, but for leadership teams. Working on these issues is what's going to help boards and leadership teams realize more value and actually add value. Most governance failures happen because one of these 4 things is weak or breaks down. And I'm going to come back and refer to these 4 pillars as we go. I want to talk about 2 foundational capabilities. Now, we know we cannot control our circumstances, but as leaders and board members, complete control over how we respond. And the question is, will you choose to be a captain, somebody who steps up, somebody who leads, sets a vision, motivates the team? Or are you going to be a captive, somebody who throws up their arms and says, it's out of my control? Being the victim and other people determine your story. It's much better to be a captain. And when you think you can't control anything, change your question. What can you control? What can you shape? The second thing we need to do is see, think, and do differently. Now, when we talk about seeing differently, it's about seeing things from different perspectives, different viewpoints, from customers' viewpoint, an employee's viewpoint, a partner's viewpoint. And it's also knowing when you need to zoom in, when you need to zoom out. And it's not just looking at the present, it's looking forward, thinking about where trends are going. Now, it's great to get that information, but we can't filter it through the same thinking. So we need to start thinking differently, different mental models, different frameworks, like the very one we're talking about. And it's a shift from saying, I can do this or I can do that, binary thinking, to both and. If you think about Amazon, they don't say pick fast delivery or low price. They say pick two on this on the side of their delivery vans. And if you can't deliver both, if you're a competitor, you're not going to be around for very long. And the next thing, seeing and thinking is great, but unless you do something differently, nothing changes, nothing matters. And when we think about doing something differently, one of the things we need to do is become future ready, better prepared, more resilient. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be prepared for everything, but it's about having a posture of preparedness. If you live in Florida, you probably have what you need for when a hurricane happens. If you wait till the last minute, you're going to be in trouble. If you think about in your own homes, you probably have more toilet paper than you had 5 years ago. You probably have duct tape, WD-40, batteries. Maybe you have an emergency contact list. But what are some of the basics that a company can do? Do they have people to put together a communication plan? Do they have a crisis team or kind of a SWAT team? So here is where we're going to introduce our secret weapon. And this is the 5 leadership superpowers. Now, when I talk about the leadership superpowers, they do not replace core leadership capabilities. So think about them as an overlay. They're meant to augment leadership. The superpowers address 5 tensions. So it's not a question of I can do this or that. You need to do both sides of that tension. The first superpower is being a present futurist. Now, a present futurist is somebody who can focus on both the present and the future. Because if you only focus on one, if you only focus on the present, you're never going to get to the future. And if you focus on the future and ignore the present, you're not going to get there either. So it's about robustly understanding the context you're in. We talked about seeing things from different perspectives. It's about forward thinking. It's about looking at trends, watching out for early warning signals, and that information so you're able to make more informed decisions. Having that information can help you that when you make decisions, the decisions you make today impact what you can do tomorrow. The next superpower is being an experienced learner. It's recognizing that while some experience is relevant, leaders and board members today need to learn. They need to be curious. They need to ask questions. They need to be open to challenge, and doing so in a psychologically safe environment. It's important that we be prepared risk takers. Now, I know, well, I can't see everybody right now. You're probably shuddering when I say risk takers. But risk taking is a core part of business. Everything you do or don't do entails some risk. So it's taking smart risks, calculated risks. It's about experimenting and learning, piloting, making small bets. And on the prepare side, it's about being a lot more risk aware. And being risk aware is not just thinking about the basic events, a cybersecurity breach, a fire in the plant. It's remembering that risks are interlinked. You face a portfolio of risks. So it's thinking through, people, talk about geopolitics. And I remember thinking about Ukraine, and that was far away, and it was horrific what was happening there. But I'm saying, here I live in Atlanta. How's that going to affect me? Well, we found out very quickly how interconnected everything is with fuel prices. And when you start to put in sanctions, that affects our businesses. And this idea of being prepared, again, goes back to that posture of preparedness. Fourth is being a strategic executor, balancing strategy and operations, recognizing that they're linked, recognizing that execution and operations needs to be aligned with strategy and vice versa. It means not making a short-term decision that impairs your long-term. A perfect example of that was Delta Airlines. Unlike a lot of the other airlines, one of the things their CEO, Ed Bastian, said was we need to protect the future. And in saying that, Delta treated their people differently. They just didn't have across the board cuts. They did furloughs. They communicated with their people. They kept them engaged. And as a result, when travel came back, and for the last couple of years, Delta's been the top airline. So those things make a difference. And lastly, the fifth superpower is being an accountable collaborator. It's recognizing that we need to work across our functions, across our organizations, even with our partners outside. And because the complexity and the size of the challenges we face, we need to work together. We need to work as a team. We need to be focused on outcomes. We're collaborating to achieve an outcome, not just to be busy, not just to do activities. And when we know what the outcome is, we can own it and we can be accountable for it as a team. Accountability shouldn't be a way to point fingers and try and find who to blame people. We want to get things done. We want to achieve outcomes. Now, the beauty of the model is that it's universal. It's kind of like having type O blood. It works in any environment. It applies in any industry. It, it applies across companies. It applies to CIOs, CFOs, CHROs, CMOs, into different committees. These are the things, the capabilities we need to build to go from A to B. Now let's look at a company that has actually done this in practice. So many of you have heard of Patagonia. They're a designer and retailer of outdoor clothing and gear for what they call the silent sports: climbing, surfing, skiing, fishing, and trail running. They were founded over 50 years ago. And throughout that time period, they've had significant revenue growth and growth in market value. How do they have the superpowers in action? They're present futurists. They understand the current environment. They know where trends are going around the environment and sustainability. They have that vision of having long-term sustainability and social impact. They're experienced learners because they're leveraging experience, but they're also fostering experimentation, generating new ideas, asking the people in the stores who use the products how they can improve so those employees are valued. They're prepared risk takers. They've been pioneers in environmental advocacy. And at the same time, while with risk awareness and taking steps to maintain sustainability and the future of the company. They're strategic executors. Their operations are aligned with their mission, from the supply chain to decision making, to balancing short and long term. And they're great when it comes to being accountable collaborators. They're partners inside and outside the company to actually achieve their sustainability goals and help others do the same. Employees are loyal. It's a purpose-driven culture. They're highly engaged. Customers are getting superior products and are loyal to the brand. Looking at the environment, Patagonia has a smaller footprint and is maximizing their positive impact. They have set a benchmark for the industry. And for investors and owners, they're getting profit and fulfilling their purpose. So that's just one example. There are many stories I could share. Now, what's interesting with the superpowers, and I'm going to break for a couple of questions in just a moment. The superpowers inform and support one another. So it's not 5 standalone things. It's a combination of 5 that provides a multiplier effect, an amplifier. You think about being CrossFit. Now, I often talk about the power of 5. The superpowers, again, amplifying that effect, can address so many more issues. Boards of directors and leadership teams, I would say collectively, should have all 5. Because if you don't, you're going to have a blind spot, and that's not good. But individual board members or executives should strive for proficiency in 1 to 3 and appreciate the rest. That's how you start to make change. Now, we're going to look at what does this matter when it comes to board governance. So if you think about it, which superpowers do you need to improve? So I'd like you to vote, pick 2, and the top one that needs the most improvement, we're going to take a deeper dive in. You get another 20 or 30 seconds here. This is interesting. A little bit different than I normally see. All right, let's keep those votes coming. So it looks like present futurist is actually the one that seems to be the weakest. Although prepared risk taker is moving. This is interesting because when I've done this with other groups, it tends to be prepared risk taker and strategic executor because people think they're doing better being a present futurist. So let's actually dive in. And let's see. I want to be able to see you, so I need to change some things on my screen. Let me actually stop screen sharing. So being a present futurist, I mentioned that what that entails is a better understanding of your current environment, having a robust understanding of the context you're in, the people you're working with. And it's also about looking out for signals, tracking, doing different scenarios. When you're doing that, you're able to make better decisions. You're less likely to be caught off guard. So let me stop there. And I want to ask you, what do you see as the risks of not having the superpower? So you can come off mute or you can put your comments in chat.
Jay, it's interesting, Corey Cox here. I'm thinking back to my early 2000s days when I was still at Ford Motor Company. And we used to have Yankelovich in the monitor giving us insights on futuring and whatnot. And the thing they kept talking about was water in the United States, water particularly in the West. And now that we're in 2024, I see that all the time. And then we've got the climate stuff going on, warming. And it seems that it was very much on target. But I sat there in the early phase of my career in early 2000s at Ford going, why are we talking about water, right? I was very much in the present. Are we going to hit enough cars getting wholesaled and coming out of the field to keep the plant running tomorrow, as opposed to water 25 years from now? So,
I mean, that's a good point. The point is, if you're not paying attention, you miss things. You don't understand things. Any other comments? I'm going to look at chat here. Anybody else want to share anything? Let's talk about what are the benefits of having this superpower. If you have a better understanding of the present, you have more anticipation, a little more foresight. How does it help?
You know, Jay, it reminds me of the old saying that, who was it, Wayne Gretzky or whoever it was, it says, don't skate to the puck, skate to where the puck's going to be, right?
Yep.
And, it's the same thing here, present futurist. Obviously you're aware of what's going on right now, but where do you think the organization is going to be, or what challenges you think they're going to face, whether it be 1 year, 3 years, 5 years down the road? And that's what, the board also, I think, needs to be talking about at times as well with management. I don't know what else other than that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now my question is, what can you do to improve and build this superpower? If you put your suggestions in the chat, I want to see what we come up with, and I'm going to offer a few of my own. Or you can come off mute. Just think about for a moment how you can be better in getting different stakeholder perspectives. If in getting the customer's perspective, what's a good resource? Do all of you talk to your frontline employees? They're the ones who are interacting with the customer. Does the board ever go out and walk around the stores or walk around the factories, talk to customers, talk to service reps. That's something that's very easy. You can also use AI, something like ChatGPT, to investigate different market trends, what other people are saying are risks that you need to consider. It's also about setting up some monitoring. What signals do you need to look for? What trends? Extrapolating where those are going to be. Working through some different scenarios, not just the basics like a cybersecurity one, but bring in other things. Think about combinations that can happen. What if one of your suppliers all of a sudden said, we're not shipping to you? For whatever reason, they can't, you're in a different geography. Or what would happen if a competitor introduced a new business model at the same time there was a geopolitical event? So it's about being able to talk about those things. So let me go back and share my screen again. So as you think about this, bear with me a second. I need to get back to my controls. There we go. So if we think about how governance is improved, by being a present futurist, you're going to have fewer surprises. You're going to be able to make informed decisions. By being an experienced learner, you're going to build that learning culture, that growth mindset, that curiosity. So you're not running away from a disruption or uncertainty because you know you can figure it out working with your team. Prepared risk takers know the game is about playing to win, not playing to avoid losing. They're better able to make risk-informed decisions. If I know I'm prepared for something, then I can withstand something. I'm able to do more versus if I know I'm going to be knocked over, I can't. It might, in terms of how we help customers, how we help each other. As a strategic executor, this idea of adaptive strategy management, we can't just set a strategy in January and come back and look at it next January. Conditions are changing. Competition is changing so fast that we have to be able to adapt on the fly. And as accountable collaborators, we're building a high-performing team where there's ownership and accountability. And we can do so much more as a team in getting the right people in the right places. Now, the other part that's really interesting is...
Jay, can I just interject there for a second? Because there was a comment in the chat.
Oh, please.
Yeah, that this could be another tool to use when selecting a new board member so that the board is not filled with the same superpower. Have you ever run across that, or any of your clients ever help you, ask you to help them, formulate a nominating, committee process around these superpowers?
So it's interesting. I was just about to talk about that. So if you think about the different governance processes, and we think about succession planning, you want to have board members, you want to have leaders who are future ready. You want them to have a track record of thinking not just about the present, but also being strategic, thinking about the future. Leaders who don't come in and say, I know it all. They come in because they're curious, they're learning, they want to understand the environment, they're asking questions. I'd rather have that type of a board member than somebody who thinks they know everything, because we all can't be experts. And it's also about bringing in board members who fit and can work with the other board members, not somebody who's going to hog the room. So from a board evaluation standpoint, from a succession planning standpoint, from a nominating committee standpoint, the superpowers can be very instrumental. And again, I'll go back to the NACD report talking about the importance of culture, and other studies by McKinsey and Bain and Deloitte. They all are talking about future readiness, but none of them are telling you how. This is a toolkit in terms of how. And when you think about board development, board education, you can use the superpowers as an evaluation tool. And there is a push now for more frequent board evaluations. So if this was a list of board members and you're looking across the different superpowers, green is proficient. The yellow type is they appreciate it, and red is not really having a clue. If you look at these, and I talked about having coverage for all 5 on a board. In this example, there's no coverage for being a prepared risk taker. So a board that is weak in particular areas should get educated and work with a coach, work with an outside advisor and say, how do we get better prepared? How do we become more risk aware? And if we take it a step further and we look across, we have 3 board members who are not proficient in any of the superpowers. Now, this could be one of 2 things. One, it's a developmental opportunity for Richard, for John to attend a training, a webinar, be coached to develop those skills. On the other hand, these could be board members who are so set in their ways that think they know everything, that are there to collect their check, and they don't want to invest any more time. That's where you might want to think about, do I want that person on the board? Is that person adding value as a board member to the company? So, just like we talked about learn, unlearn, and relearn, you need to look at onboarding, unboarding, and reboarding. Now, the other thing, going back to succession planning, very often people talk about hard and soft skills. And very often soft is considered a little bit discretionary. But I don't call things soft. I call them vital, because in today's world, being able to work as a group and having those skills is essential to being a leader, to have a high-functioning leadership team or a high-functioning board. And then there are role-based skills. You need both. The other thing is hiring people, recruiting board members who aren't like the horse guy from the Olympics. Stephen Nedarosik, who his one thing he could do was a pommel horse, and he was great at it. But when you're in a team, everybody can have different specialties. And in terms of getting that all-around medal, or if you think about a soccer team, you need people who can work across functions. And that idea, that thick T, is somebody who's a more strategic generalist. They can talk finance, they can talk marketing, they can talk risk. That's important because that's part of the cohesiveness. And it's having people who have the capabilities to support your strategy. and can adapt. When I talked about stakeholder value, some of you are probably wondering, how does that happen? Now you've seen how by doing some of these things differently, customers, employees, partners, shareholders are far better off when the organization is future ready. They're better served, they have better experiences, and they get rewarded better. So the case is rather clear. We've answered the why it's a business imperative. We've talked about the what, the 4 pillars, the foundational capabilities, and the 5 leadership superpowers. We've just talked about the how when we looked at present futurists, when we talked about succession planning. Standing by and not doing anything really is risky and downright dangerous. So think about which way you want to choose. And keep in mind, this isn't something you can hire a consulting firm to do. This isn't something you can outsource. Remember, I said it's your job, but you don't have to do it alone. Having an expert guide, a catalyst, a navigator who will take the time to understand you, your challenges, who you like and trust, who will partner with you, who will make the journey simpler, not simple, but simpler, easier, but not easy, and will shorten the timeline so you can start getting results. Because as you work on each of these superpowers, you're going to learn different things. You're going to have different discussions. You're going to find things out sooner. Now, I have 2 suggestions. The first suggestion is to understand where you are as an individual or as a leadership team. So I offer a complimentary online assessment. You just have to scan the QR code, and we'll be sending the QR code in the link in a follow-up email after the session. Or you can conduct a group future readiness assessment, looking at the board as a group or an entire leadership team. So you start to understand where the gaps are. The second thing you can do is invest in learning more and becoming future ready. I offer a number of webinars and LinkedIn live sessions. I'm about to launch an online course, which will be coming out in early September. I'll be hosting a public boot camp, and we also do customized programs specific to your company, to an entire leadership team. This information will also be shared with you. Email me, ask questions, receive notifications about events, connect and follow me on LinkedIn. I post regularly. I do LinkedIn live sessions and webinars. And I offer a free complimentary future readiness planning session that you can set up on my calendar. So the last challenge I have for you is, what one step will you take to make this happen and to make this real? I want you to make a public commitment. I want you to say, what one thing are you going to do in the next week to make a change? Don't be shy. Let's go back. Bear with me for 1 second.
Good.
Didn't work.
There we go. Let me share my screen again so you can see. So we had somebody talk about taking the survey, taking the assessment. What else? What else can you do? What else are you willing to commit to do? Tina, what are you going to do? You're on mute.
I'm just thinking that there's an overall thing here, is that to make it a priority.
Yep.
Pick any one of these things to make a priority.
Yeah, make
Because
it a
of that.
priority, or make it
Yeah.
a priority for your fellow board members to do it,
Yeah,
just you.
yeah, exactly. And I love Jay, it's a group thing. It's not just a one person. One person can
Right.
be the catalyst to kind of get these things going, take the assessment, take the survey. But the group has to actually really kind of be on board to see these things as important. And I think the rest can follow from that.
Well, and you know, one of the things too, you don't know what you don't know. So many of you have learned today about some new tools. When you go back to your board, when you go back to your company, share some of this information. Suggest they look at some of my content. Suggest they think about if they were future ready, if they saw things sooner, if they were open to being curious and learning. What would be different? Would they be performing better? So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions and any final thoughts. I know we went a little bit over time, and I apologize.
Anybody have any questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. Just unmute yourself and question or type it in the chat.
And feel free to speak up as well.
I think it's great. We speak a lot in our chapter and in PDA nationwide about cognitive diversity and how there are many dimensions. Obviously, it's race and gender and orientation, but it's also your training and your background and how you process data. And I think this is just another rubric for how you assess data and take action. So this was very thoughtful and helpful. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And I appreciate your comment. You know, the thing is, you know, having actionable tools and frameworks that integrate the variety of issues that we're facing, you know, versus looking at things as being one-off. Any other questions or comments?
Jay, do you ever get much pushback or a different type of thinking around any of these 5 superpowers when you talk to other organizations, boards, etc.? Oh, it's not this here one isn't important, or this one's not critical, or anything of that nature?
You know, the reality is no one has actually come back to me and said, oh, I don't need to do this superpower. They're looking at all of them. What they come back to me and say is, we don't have time. This is work. And the thing is, we know what happens when we don't do the work. And what very often people don't think about, when they say we don't have time, they've actually made the decision not to make time. Because we have an opportunity.
Right, not to make it
have an opportunity to prioritize.
Yeah.
And if this is a priority, it doesn't take a lot of time. It's a bunch of little steps. It's more thoughtfulness. And think about the pain and suffering you won't have anymore.
Hey, Jay. Corey, I've got a question for you. I was having a discussion with a senior seasoned corporate development executive this morning who's looking at making a move into a role in a very long-standing, old-school automotive repair business, a well-known brand. And she was expressing absolute shock that the organization did not have a strategist. in place, given that they're dealing with channel issues and all sorts of stuff. And they have been getting their pants beat off by the competition. And I know they've injected a whole bunch of talent from outside automotive and repair and parts, from e-commerce, from retail, from CPG, et cetera, as part of their transformation. My comment to her was, based upon what I'd seen happen in my Ford days, is that when the climate gets wonky, the old school brands that think they have all this institutional memory that grow from the inside up and don't necessarily bring many in from the outside, throw the strategy roles out the window. And they basically come to the conclusion, I'm making a broad sweeping generalization here, so understand it's not 100% applicable, but to some degree, they say, well, our operating people can be the strategists and are the strategists and should be the strategists, and it's part of their job. And then you get into is it core or is it side of desk? And to what degree is it integrated in those balance? My question is as follows. With the 5 superpowers, if that's discussed at organizations more and becomes more endemic, let's say, used, whatnot, could that possibly be a component to giving more of a strategic bent to the operating people in those businesses as they are set to transform when needed,
Well,
or more effectively compete? It seems that it would be, and that there might be some efficiency gains potentially to be had. Comments?
So from my end, I think it goes both ways. Strategists need to understand operations and how things are done. And they need to pay attention to the challenges, the things people are seeing, and vice versa. Operations people need to understand that there's this longer term strategy and that making short term decisions can impact. Now, the other thing you raised about was not having a strategist. It's almost like somebody saying to me, we have one cybersecurity expert on the board. Well, it's not enough to have one person because the entire board is responsible for cybersecurity. When I go back to my prior consulting days, having strategy in an ivory tower disconnected from operation, just being a think tank, is of limited value if they're not able to operationalize it, think about talent, think about different areas. So I get leery when people start to talk about, pure strategists, because what they do is they come to you with a report. And we all know what we do with reports. We put them on the shelf. So you need somebody who can bring in both sides. Anybody else want to respond to this?
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Thoughts? And I'm going to pick on somebody for a minute. I see Michael there. And Michael and I had a discussion at an Atlanta PDA meeting talking about this noses in, fingers out versus this idea of heads in and fingers out. So now that you've heard a little more about this, Michael, I'm curious, I believe you're NACD certified. How do you see this fitting in? Is it too much of an ask?
Well, I think that the issue of the heads in versus the noses in is an important one, because when you put your whole head in, that includes your brain and that includes the thinking. And I think the important issue is the fingers there, because you do want to have some degree of respect for the concept of governance versus manage and keep your fingers out. But I think more of your head and your brain that you can put in it, the better. And I believe that our conversation was sort of ultimately in that line. It's like, you're not all supposed to be snooping around looking for stuff, sniffing stuff out. You're supposed to actually be deeply thinking about that. And of course, that's what we all want to do. It's just a question of finding the right verbiage.
Sure. No, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Good seeing you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Great presentation.